Hey everyone. Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to do this real quick. I want to do my quick thoughts on the Xbox documentary. It was a six-part documentary that you could actually find on their YouTube channel right now. But yeah, I want to talk about it real quick. Overall, it was pretty good. I thought it started stronger than it ended. But yeah, let me just give my quick thoughts. Now, first of all, each part's about 40 minutes long. Documentary, wasn't super long or nothing like that. But yeah, it started out talking about, how the original Xbox came about. So part one was pretty much all about that, the Windows CE team versus the DirectX team and how the DirectX team went out on getting the OG Xbox. Um, how they pitched it to Bill Gates and then later Steve Ballmer. And it was again really so yeah, it started out strong in how they went to detail about everything, and then part two was even continuation of the story, talking about how before before Bill Gates went through with it, how he felt lied to on Valentine's Day and stuff, and um and and pretty much he eventually greenlit going forward with the original Xbox and the troubles they had with, production and getting games, and the first E3 Xbox appeared at, and how Halo wasn't running well. And again, they went into detail about everything. And so now a lot of the information I wouldn't say is super new, but it was still interesting. Part three, more about the Xbox post launch, right? And Halo and how big Halo was, and then the massive success Halo 2. Then they told a story I wasn't even aware of about how GTA 3 would have went to Xbox, but the Xbox Microsoft brass turned it down, you know. Part four, and then here's the problem, right? So you get three parts in, it's the original Xbox, cool. Part four, they finally talk about the Xbox 360. Now, here's the thing: the OG Xbox era lasted 4 years. The Xbox 360 and Xbox One generations both lasted 8 years each, right? And yet both consoles didn't get nearly the amount of time talking about as the OG Xbox. And then not only that, they didn't go in depth as much as as you would have thought, okay? Because four parts in, halfway through the fourth part, they're now talking about the 360. And so this was really my biggest issue with the documentary was the pacing, right? Three and a half parts goes to the original Xbox and all that. That's cool, but that's still, I'd say, at most a 6 year gap from 99 to 2005, right? Then when it comes to the Xbox 360 generation, okay, they went to detail, sure, but it lasted twice as long as the original Xbox, but they didn't talk about things like how the design went, or they didn't show any like mock-up designs of the 360 controller or nothing. It just went straight into it, as if the design for that was all easy peasy until they talk about the Red Ring of Death, you know. And at least they did a good thing of balancing the negative and positive stuff, the tumultuous history of the Xbox as a whole. So it wasn't just like a complete fluff piece where it was just like we're just praising Xbox. I was like, no, they were actually quite realistic. And what was cool, they brought in names I didn't expect to see, like Jack Trenton was on it. Don Matrick was there, so that was also cool. Seeing people you would have never guessed on this documentary be there. But still, still the Xbox 360, which was their most successful console, right, so far, um, was a massive hit. Won the generation, all that stuff. Only gets part, it's only get like one and a half parts. And then, after they talk about the 360 and then they talk about the Don Matrick era, the changes he made when Peter Moore left and stuff. Oh yeah, Peter Moore was also on the documentary. That was great to see too. But yeah, when they, and the changes he made, focusing on the Connect, and the issues the Connect had, and then what's cool is that they mentioned that the Connect wasn't the biggest success with games. I personally didn't like any of the Connect games back in the day, but it it ended up being a medical innovation in particular, and they showed how it was helping people with disabilities or stroke victims using the Connect. That was really, really cool. And I want to see more of that. More of stuff, you know, maybe most people don't know of or aren't aware of. And that's where it was most interesting to me when it was talking about, the when it went in depth into things, right? Yeah. Look, Connect didn't blow me away games wise, but technologically, it's still doing impressive stuff today to the point that in the medical field, that's where it's had its biggest impact, and all thanks to the gaming space. So at this point, the documentary was very good. Talked about a lot of stuff that uh, most people probably aren't aware of, and then it got to part six, and this is where that just fell flat with me, because throughout the whole thing, they you could tell they did their research. They weren't afraid of going in depth about anything. But in part six, look, the Xbox One generation was from 2013 to 2020. And that 8 year span, right? There are a lot, and I mean a lot happened. And they only talked about the Xbox One for like 30 minutes in a six part um documentary about the history of Xbox. The Xbox One's got 30 minutes. And the problem with that is that this is the least detailed that we know of, because there's been books about the 360 era, there's been books about the OG Xbox era. So if you're a gaming historian, a lot of this you knew. There's not as much information about the Xbox One era, right? For example, they talked about the Bethesda deal from 2020, the third biggest acquisition in Microsoft history, for like 30 seconds. 30 seconds on the third biggest acquisition in the company's history. They went into detail about nothing. They didn't talk about how it came about, what started the discussions, nothing. It's just like, oh, yeah, in 2020, we made a big acquisition. So Bethesda, and boom, off to the next thing. So part six is where it just fell off a cliff for me in terms of quality. Because not only do you not get any real new information, they didn't go into detail about much, right? and and so you got to see. And then not only that, a lot of the personalities they got, man, Ryan McCaffrey's and Jeff Keighley's, boy, they came off a little smug. For example, Ryan McCaffrey in part five said something just absolutely crazy, saying that the 360 had a 100% failure rate with the Red Ring of Death. Now, yeah, the Red Ring of Death failure rate was extremely high. Hell, let's in perspective, if any product had a 10% failure rate, that would be massive failure, right? And a massive issues. But 100% failure rate, it come on, man. When he said that, I had to roll my eyes at that one, because the 360 would have been dead if 100% of those consoles back in the day had the Red Ring of Death. And Microsoft did an excellent job then solving the issue and then getting the 360 back on track. But again, when they didn't go into detail into anything like they did the OG Xbox, they didn't talk about the Xbox 360 and the benefits that had, the soft reboot they did with that. They didn't talk about the Xbox One S, and they barely talked about the changes Phil Spencer made when he took over in 2014. And that's where it just went from a very good documentary to, it's sometimes it's how you finish the race than how you start it, right? So overall, as its whole, all seven parts, I'd go like a 7.5, right? If I were to rank it. But otherwise, I don't know. The last part just, it it was so close to being amazing, if only I don't know what happened if they had limitations on what they could talk about towards the end, but you talk about an 8 year constant generation for 30 minutes, but you talk about a four year, but you gave 3.5 parts to a 4 year generation. Uh, and it's see that, and you telling me that nothing super interesting happened in the era that Don Matrick leaves, Phil Spencer takes over, and all the shit Phil had to do, and all the change, and they again they mentioned the changes, but they do it at such a surface level. They didn't tell you the whys, the hows, the weirds like they were doing in the first 3, 4, 5 parts, right? So at the end, it started to feel more like some parts in the part six felt like a commercial, where the rest of it felt like a documentary. You felt these guys' struggles when they're working on the original Xbox. You didn't feel none of that when Phil Spencer, Sarah Bond, and all them were talking about the changes that were made. You think the changes that made in the Xbox One era were a walk in the park, when obviously it was clearly a headache to deal with. I mean, you had to deal with. I mean, for the love of God, part the end of part five and the beginning of part six, they used so many they used so many clips of Angry Joe bitching. Angry Joe bitch so much in the clips they use in this documentary. So I know it was hell dealing with gamers last generation, but you wouldn't have known none of that if you watched part six. You would have thought that it was a mild inconvenience at worst. So yeah, overall, you know, I'd say if you're a gaming historian, still give it a watch. You might learn some things, right? But I think most of y'all are going to come to the same conclusion I did, where there's some interesting stuff in the 360 and Xbox One era that they just skipped over, unfortunately, and it could have been a really just amazing documentary turned into something that is good but not great. So yeah, that's my review on the Power On Story of Xbox parts 1 through 6 documentary. And I'd like to know your thoughts if you've watched it. What did you think? And with that, enjoy your day, and I'm out.